Across the border in Syria, new reports of death and destruction in the country's largest city. Video on social media is said to be showing the aftermath of a Syrian bomb attack on a district of Aleppo on Wednesday. Another video shows doctors treating wounded children at a field hospital. CCTV cannot independently verify either of these videos. Video on social media, as I mentioned there, according to the United Nations, nearly 11 million Syrians need humanitarian help, but it is now being blocked by the Syrian government. On Thursday, UN Undersecretary-General Valerie Amos said the government is obstructing access to aid and that a resolution that was supposed to help civilians has failed. Earlier, my colleague Elaine Reyes spoke to our UN correspondent Liling Tan, who has a wrap-up of the proceedings.
4 years into the Syrian civil war, the UN says it has not been able to reach nearly 50% of people in dire need of aid. Speaking to the Security Council, the UN Undersecretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs, Valerie Amos, said that arbitrary restrictions and obstacles, including bureaucratic procedures imposed by the Syrian government, have impeded where aid agencies can deliver supplies to whom and how often.
Deliberately obstructing humanitarian access and depriving civilians of access to services essential to their survival is unlawful and inhumane. Mr. President, in 2011, I told this Council that 1 million people in Syria needed humanitarian assistance. That figure now stands at 10.8 million, 1.5 million more than there were just 6 months ago.
As Syria's humanitarian needs outpace efforts, the humanitarian chief said that the Syrian government in April imposed new procedures that have resulted in a large backlog in deliveries, and that so far this month only 50% of planned food deliveries have been dispatched. But Amos also put part of the blame on opposition groups that have attacked and threatened aid workers and refused to cooperate with them. And she highlighted targeted and indiscriminate attacks as well on civilians, as well as civilian structure that have hindered movements. Now, Amos called on the Security Council to ensure that all parties to the conflict abide by their obligations under international law and that nearly 11 million men, women and children depend on it. Elaine?
And Liling, what was Syria's response to the accusations that they were hampering humanitarian access?
As you can imagine, Elaine, the Syrian ambassador was not too pleased. In fact, he was quite indignant on several issues that he found with the report, including the latest figures that Valerie Amos had brought up, the 10.8 million people in need of aid. Now, Bashar Jafari called these figures exaggerated and blown up without sources cited in the report.
My government conveyed its resentment to the reserve of the UN in Syria over the perfunctory manner used by some high UN official about the astronomical figures of inaccurate and undocumented number of needies and the humanitarian situation in Syria.
Jafari also found fault with the report for not naming the armed opposition groups as terrorist groups with links to Al-Qaeda, which he said was part of the reason for the worsening humanitarian situation, along with sanctions imposed on Syria. And in terms of the humanitarian access, he cited a separate World Health Organization that said progress had been made in delivering immunizations, food and other forms of relief to millions of people, and that this was accomplished with the assistance from the Syrian government. Access that he said Amos had omitted in her report. And he also said funding challenges and poor coordination on the part of specialized humanitarian agencies had contributed to the problem. Elaine?
And Liling, we're hearing that the Obama administration has asked Congress to approve U.S. military training for Syrian opposition fighters. So how would this play into the situation?
Yes, according to what I read from the White House statement, now this was a $500 million funding request to provide U.S. military support, assistance and equipment to moderate opposition forces. And by moderate, it means that these are forces that the U.S. government have has already vetted. And the aim is to allow Syrians to take their future into their own hands. Now, if Congress gives the go-ahead, this would mark the first time that the U.S. will be directly involved militarily in the Syrian conflict, while also supplementing a CIA training program that is already underway.